This moment instantly blew up, and you can actually watch the panic set in as Trump's defenders try to explain away what he just admitted on live television. Before we dive into it, hit subscribe and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what you think about this situation. Donald Trump just said the quiet part out loud on live television, and even some of his own defenders on CNN struggled to clean it up afterward. During an exchange with reporters about the economic fallout tied to the Iran conflict, Trump openly admitted that Americans' financial struggles are not even a little bit on his mind while negotiating with Iran. And that comment immediately detonated across the entire panel because it directly contradicts the image Trump spent years building as the self-proclaimed champion of working-class Americans. What made this segment even more brutal for MAGA was watching conservative commentator Jason Rantz desperately try to frame Trump's statement as some kind of strategic negotiation tactic, only for the rest of the panel to push back by pointing out the obvious reality. Americans are already drowning under rising costs. Inflation is now outpacing wages. Gas prices are surging again because of the Iran conflict, and voters are increasingly blaming Trump for making their lives more expensive. And the deeper problem for Republicans is that this isn't happening in a vacuum. The CNN panel brought up polling showing growing frustration, not just from Democrats and independents, but even from Republicans themselves, while ordinary Americans describe living in survival mode, struggling to afford groceries, housing, and basic financial security. So what you're about to watch is essentially a perfect political storm. Trump admitting he isn't thinking about Americans' financial pain, his defenders scrambling to justify it, and even economic analysts worrying that the Iran conflict could create long-term damage, both politically and economically. Let's get into it.
Good evening, I'm Phillip in New York. We're in President Trump's economy now, and most people aren't happy with it. Tonight, the president is heading to China as the Iran war is driving inflation to its highest point in years. But as Trump pushes toward a peace deal with Tehran, he's made this stunning admission about Americans who are struggling to get by right now.
When you're negotiating with Iran, Mr. President, to what extent are Americans' financial situations motivating you to make a deal?
Not even a little bit. The only thing that matters when I'm talking about Iran, they can't have a nuclear weapon. I don't think about Americans' financial situation. I don't think about anybody.
Today, for the first time in 3 years, inflation has outpaced wages. That means that life is getting less and less affordable. And just to keep up with inflation, the average U.S. household now has to spend $319 more every month for the same things compared to January 2025. And tonight, new polling is showing that people are fed up with this. 77% say that Trump's policies have increased the cost of living. Another 70% don't like how Trump is handling the economy. And despite all of that, Trump continues to claim that things are booming.
Now we're the hottest country anywhere in the world. Inflation is plummeting. Incomes are rising. The economy is roaring back. Thanks to these pro-growth policies, our economy is roaring. We have the greatest economy we've ever had. We're the hottest country anywhere in the world. The economy is going great. Gas prices are way down, and the stock market is way up today. Our country now is the hottest country anywhere in the world. We have this unbelievable economy. Grocery prices are way down. Used car prices are way down. The hottest, the best country anywhere in the world.
When we see inflation jumping up to a 3-year high, Rana, and now eclipsing wages, that is a predictable outcome of raising input prices, particularly gasoline.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, gas, food, these are the things that people really pay attention to when it comes to inflation. And what's interesting is even if we were to get some kind of resolution to the Iran situation in the next few weeks, which personally I don't think we're going to get, the pain would keep coming because gas takes months to get where it's going. The supply chains that feed, the economies that depend on that energy, these are things that are like dominoes. You know, if you remember way back to COVID or the beginning of the Ukraine war, the pain of those disruptions lasted for months, even if there were solutions. And so this is something that's not going away anytime soon. Gas is also the one price that Americans, all Americans almost, see every single day. Right. So it's a big deal.
And the president saying, I understand the point that he's making that Iran not getting a nuclear weapon is important to him. But the idea that he would also say that he doesn't think about the cost to Americans, that is beyond just a gaffe. It's also an admission of something that he's not paying attention to right now.
No, I don't think it's an admission of anything beyond how you negotiate. You would not give this kind of power to Iran. I think they're two separate issues. You've got the political issue, and I think he made a mistake politically in saying it in that way. But the reality is, when you're negotiating with a terrorist regime, you're not going to tell them, I'm hanging on to this one piece so you can exploit it, thus we can't actually get to any kind of resolution. Strategically, from purely a standpoint of negotiation, it was a smart move, but he's taking it at a political cost. And I think that also points to him truly believing this, that he's not going to do what's politically right for him right now or for the Republican Party, because what he knows is an actual threat coming from Iran in the long term. And to the point that all the polling seems to indicate that we all kind of understand Iran can't have access to nuclear weapons, period, ever. And so he's taking some short-term pain. He hopes it's short-term for some long-term gain.
I don't think he's taking short-term pain. I think the American people are taking short-term pain. And I don't think the president has to say whether he cares or not about the American people in terms of, he's president of the United States. I would hope he cares about the American people.
He does.
And he doesn't need to. So he doesn't, I mean, whether you say it one way or not, the reality is Americans are suffering. And the actions that he is taking makes it seem like he's not going to do the things to stop them from suffering. Now, two things can be true. He could not do that, and he could also believe, as I believe, that Iran can't have a nuke. And yet, Americans don't want to suffer, and they are fed up with it. And the political costs will be consequential. Maybe not to him. I mean, he'll become a lame duck. But to the people of his party. And the question is, when will they turn on him? Because when they won't, he'll still have his seat in the Oval Office. But many people won't on
your point, I think, is very fair, but also looking at the CNN poll today is actually kind of interesting. While it's not good news for the president, undoubtedly so, but his numbers aren't actually moving in any real direction. He's been stagnant on his approval rating since I think it was October.
The dumps.
But I'm saying, despite all of this, they're not continuing to dive down.
Let's take a closer look at the numbers. When you compare April 2025 to today, Democrats continue to disapprove, shockingly, of President Trump on the cost of living issue. Independents, more independents, 18% more disapprove now of the president than a year ago. Republicans, it's a 25% increase over a year ago. So there is definitely a shift happening, including among independents and within his own party. People who are blaming him for making their lives more expensive.
I think, though, when you're the president of the United States, I mean, you said it right, they're blaming him. Who else are they going to blame? He is 100% responsible, and that means he's responsible if things continue to get worse, or he's responsible and deserves all the credit if we exit Iran and things end up remarkably well. And I think when you look at the polling, obviously he's seeing it as well, right? He knows exactly what he was doing when he went into Iran. He's very worried about midterms. Yes, he'll be in the Oval Office, but he knows what happened in the first term, right? He remembers getting impeached time and time again. He wants to win these midterms 100%, and I think the polling is accurate. I think we all want a better economy. Whether you love Donald Trump or not, you want the numbers to be better, but two things can be true at once. You can want a better economy and yet still believe that when we're out of Iran and this is behind us, he is the only person, hands down, that could actually get costs down and bring us back to where we want to be.
I absolutely agree that Donald Trump is responsible for the current state of the economy. It seems like the Trump administration has been operating with the sole goal of inflicting as much damage on working Americans as possible. He took office and spiked 2.9% inflation up to 3.8%. Gas prices are up to $4.50 in most states. And he did this all while stripping insurance away from 10 million Americans. I think the most impressive part is the deficit hasn't even decreased at all. The deficit is still increasing year over year. And one more point I want to make is when Donald Trump took office, he and Elon Musk immediately gutted the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, right? This protected people like us from fraud, from predatory actions from banks or businesses. He gutted that. So Americans are not only worse off, Americans are not only struggling in their pocketbook, but we're more prone to fraud. I don't get how this makes us safer or better off at all.
You know, one of the things about Iran that really worries me, and I actually kind of agree with you in terms of how what he had to say on air at that particular moment, but, you know, the whole Iran war is just bad news. It's bad news politically. It's bad news economically. It's not going away anytime soon. And interestingly, you know, we're about to go into a summit with China. The Iran war just handed China a huge weapon because America is depending more on fossil fuels. China's trying to become a clean tech leader, and this is only going to make them move faster in that direction and sort of push them into owning the industries of the future, while the U.S. is stuck paying more for gas, and the rest of the world is angry with us.
And also the question of when will this end is on everybody's mind, not just the Iran war, but the subsequent economic pain. Let me just play what some Americans across the country have been saying about what they're dealing with economically right now.
It's survival mode, and that's a mode that haven't been used to.
For me, a financial stressor is groceries.
Everything's gone up, from the beef to the eggs.
I'm a junior, and I missed the whole semester of school because I couldn't afford housing. I want to have a house and have a family, and you know what I mean? Like my parents did.
Yeah, I mean, what that young man just said at the end there, that's also backed up in the numbers. 47% believe hard work is enough to get ahead. 38% believe they will ever buy a home. 34% say that they can't comfortably afford $1,000, and just 28% say that they can afford to take a vacation. The number one thing that this president was elected on was bringing the cost of living down, making people's lives better. And I think one of the core issues, and we'll get to more on the Iran war later in the show, but one of the core reasons this war is so unpopular is because many Americans don't believe that this was a necessary move right now. And they see themselves, by contrast, paying a pretty steep price at a time when they don't feel like that.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, the problem here is, when is the right move? When do you actually get involved? When they have
in January.
Nuclear weapons capability? And the answer is, of course, no. So it is a fine line of trying to figure out when you're supposed to get involved. We've been having this conversation for decades, specifically on what to do with Iran, and the president decided now is the time. Now, that could be the wrong political move, and there are consequences economically for that. But we also have to look at the big picture. Every president has said we need to do something. He took a stance.
Yeah.
Debate the stance, totally fair. Debate the results of that, totally
Obama
fair.
took a stance, and Trump seems to be getting us to a worse
The stance that he took led us to a point where they were this much closer
What does it tell you that
to not just
Trump
having,
is getting a worse deal?
Not just have more ballistic cover for their actual nuclear program, but also getting closer to that. That is a result of that.
Well, the CIA just came out with a report saying that Iran could maybe spend 3 to 4 more months with this blockade, and that would turn the global economy into a recession.
But when you're the president of the United States, you have to look at the totality of circumstances, right? And so, if yes, Iran is one piece on the playing on the chessboard, but the American economy, you could say, was your queen, right? In this, in like the Iran might, I mean, I hate to put it like this, but might have been like your front row of pawns. But the economy to the American people were your queen in chess, and he exposed his queen. And so you lose the game when your queen becomes
politically. I think he exposed the queen.
Not just
we have
politically,
2%.
but like,
I'm sorry. We have 2% GDP growth. We have 10% increase in business investments in this country. That does matter.
GDP growth, just to be clear, is not some blockbuster number.
No, it's not.
We are not.
But we're pretending it's going in the opposite direction.
But it is not. That's coming off of a period in which GDP growth was less than 1%. We can't gaslight about the actual history. A whole year of virtually zero private sector job growth. GDP growth that was below 1% and only went up to 2% is not a victory.
But, I mean,
it's a sign of an economy that is struggling.
I'm sorry, but when you say that there's growth and then they're struggling, it doesn't match.
Let me put it this way. It's a sign of a resilient economy, which suggests that it is taking headwinds.
Jason,
let me let Rana weigh in on that.
Well, also, you know, I like your framing of the chessboard. I would actually say Iran's sort of a bishop. You know, it's important, you know, the U.S. economy is the queen. But here's what, if you're going to take the bishop, and I agree, you know, you can say this is an important thing to do, you've got to get it just right. Iran is not Venezuela. Iran is a tough nut, maybe the toughest nut, aside from, say, the South China Seas, to crack. You go in, you know, you knock out everybody we could have negotiated with, but the judges are still in place. The repression state is still in place, so people can't rise up. This was, you know, an absolute screw up in terms of how it was done. And it is going to be a legacy for a decade for this country.
And there might have been reasons why other presidents did it different ways, because when you actually look at the totality of circumstances, you end up with an economy that is so fragile that your party can't stay in power.
But then you end up with the nuclear power.
We're going to have another discussion about Iran just coming up in the show. But next for us,
There's a reason this clip is politically devastating for Donald Trump, and it's because it cuts directly against the single most important promise that got him reelected in the first place. Trump didn't run on foreign policy. He didn't run on starting another Middle East conflict. He didn't run on economic sacrifice for geopolitical strategy. He ran on one core message over and over again, that he understood the pain of ordinary Americans better than Democrats did, and that he was going to make life affordable again. That was the entire pitch. Groceries, gas, rent, inflation, the cost of living. That was the emotional center of the MAGA campaign. And now here we are, watching Donald Trump openly admit on camera that Americans' financial struggles are not even a little bit on his mind while negotiating with Iran. And what makes that moment so brutal is not just the wording itself, it's the fact that people actually believe him because his policies already reflect exactly what he said. That's why Jason Rantz looked completely ridiculous trying to spin this into some brilliant negotiation strategy. Because you can't tell Americans who are struggling to pay rent, drowning in credit card debt, or skipping meals because groceries are too expensive that this is all part of some grand chess move. At some point, reality crushes propaganda. And the reality right now is that people are hurting economically while Trump keeps pretending the economy is booming. That's why the panel started laughing when Republicans tried to frame weak GDP growth and rising investment numbers like they were proof of some incredible economic success story. Americans are not stupid. They know the difference between economic talking points and the reality of their own bank accounts. They know whether groceries cost more. They know whether gas prices are eating up their paycheck. They know whether they can afford a home. They know whether their wages are keeping up with inflation. And the numbers in this segment were absolutely brutal.
Only 38% of Americans believe they'll ever own a home. Only 28% feel they can afford a vacation. Nearly half of Americans no longer believe hard work is enough to get ahead. That is not a thriving economy. That is a population losing faith in the entire economic system. And what makes Trump especially vulnerable politically is that he was elected specifically because he promised to fix that frustration. So when people now feel worse off under his leadership, the backlash becomes personal because voters feel lied to. And let's be honest about something else here, too. Trump's comment exposed the fundamental contradiction at the center of modern MAGA politics. The movement constantly brands itself as populist, pro-worker, anti-elite, anti-establishment. But who is leading it? Billionaires, corporate elites, wealthy media personalities, people who have never once had to worry about rent, medical bills, grocery costs, or whether their card is going to decline at the gas station. Donald Trump does not understand economic struggle because Donald Trump has never experienced economic struggle. This is a man born into wealth who inherited massive financial advantages, spent decades operating inside elite circles, and repeatedly used bankruptcy laws and corporate protections that ordinary Americans would never have access to. So when he says Americans' financial struggles are not on his mind, that probably is the most honest thing he said in years, because nothing about his life has ever forced him to think like an ordinary person trying to survive paycheck to paycheck. And that's exactly why his administration governs the way it does. Tax cuts tilted toward the wealthy, tariffs that raise prices on consumers, cuts to protections like the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, healthcare rollbacks, policies that increase corporate power while ordinary people absorb the consequences. The pattern is obvious. And what's even more politically dangerous for Republicans is that this entire Iran situation appears self-inflicted to a huge portion of the public. That point got buried slightly during the CNN segment, but it's critical. Trump and his supporters keep repeating this line that Iran can't have a nuclear weapon, as though that alone justifies everything. But what they never want to discuss is that there already was an agreement in place designed specifically to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. And by virtually every credible international assessment at the time, Iran was complying with it. Trump tore that agreement apart. So now Republicans are essentially asking Americans to accept economic pain, inflation spikes, rising gas prices, and the possibility of long-term instability over a crisis that many people believe Trump himself helped create. That is politically toxic, especially when voters are already financially exhausted. And Phillip made an incredibly important point during this discussion that Republicans really don't want to confront. Americans do not believe this conflict was necessary right now.
That matters enormously because the public is far more willing to tolerate economic hardship during conflicts they view as unavoidable or defensive. But when people see a conflict as optional, reckless, or politically manufactured, the economic backlash becomes exponentially worse. That's why this issue is becoming such a midterm nightmare for Republicans. Because Democrats now have the perfect contrast message. Trump promised affordability. Prices went up. Trump promised peace. Now there's another Middle East conflict. Trump promised to fight for working Americans. Then he admitted their struggles are not even on his mind. You could literally build entire campaign ads around that one clip alone, and Democrats would be crazy not to. Republicans know it too, even if they won't say it publicly, because behind closed doors, there is absolutely panic about how damaging this kind of messaging becomes in swing districts where voters are already frustrated with the economy. And the worst part for Republicans is that Trump keeps making these situations worse himself. Nobody forced him to answer the question that way. Nobody forced him to say he doesn't think about Americans' financial situations. That wasn't Democrats twisting his words. That wasn't media bias. That was Donald Trump speaking freely and revealing exactly where his priorities are. And honestly, that may end up being the defining weakness of his second presidency, the gap between the image he sells and the reality people experience. Because populism only works as long as people believe you're fighting for them. The moment voters start believing you don't actually care about their struggles, the entire political illusion begins collapsing. And clips like this accelerate that collapse faster than anything Democrats could ever manufacture on their own. This wasn't just a bad soundbite. This was Trump exposing the truth about how disconnected he really is from the people who trusted him to improve their lives.